Buonasera, buonasera. Come stanno oggi?
Bene. Lei come sta?
Cominciamo oggi con un'aria scritta di Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Let's start with an aria written by Mozart. Pincan dal vino, calda la testa, una gran festa fa preparar. Se trovi in piazza qualche ragazza, te cor con quella cerca menar. Te cor con quella cerca menar, cerca menar, cerca menar. Perhaps I should sing in English.
No, it's fine. Yeah, but because
We will return to Italian later. It's long been my duty to contemplate beauty, hence constellations and planets delight. Few sights terrestrial match no celestial, stars like the eyes of a goddess at night. Stars like the eyes of a goddess at night, goddess at night, sparkling so bright. Round moons of Jupiter, gold rings of Saturn, a lunar eclipse, of hue like the lips of golden tressed Venus, with skin lily white. Lunar eclipse of hue like the lips of golden tressed Venus, with skin lily white. Golden tressed Venus, who visits every night. The stars are my mania, my muse is Urania, bewitched by Titania. I can't sleep at night, can't sleep at night, I'm up all night. Ah, but what pleasure I get full measure, heavenly bodies, mine for delight. All seven Pleiades, mine for delight, mine for delight, mine for delight, mine for delight. Come mi chiamo? Who am I? What is my name? Galileo? No, ma io sono suo amico. I am not Galileo, but he is a friend of mine. Io sono il uomo del Rinascimento. I am Renaissance man. And here we are in Denmark with many astronomers in the room. And who might be the most famous person from Denmark? Certainly the most famous scientist is probably Tycho Brahe. If you go to Copenhagen, you can take the ferry to the island where he built an observatory in the 1570s. And it was the first scientific institution in Western Europe. Tycho was born in 1546, and
we should move. They don't want us here.
Keep going.
Tycho was born in 1546, and he died in 1601. And just shortly before he was born, there was published a very, very important book by the Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus. So I'm not going to write much here. And he is considered the founder of modern astronomy. For time immemorial, it was considered that the Earth was not moving and at the center of the cosmos. The Greeks talked a lot about this. Copernicus published a book the year that he died, and it made a bold suggestion and presented a lot of evidence and mathematics to demonstrate that certain phenomena in the sky were more easily explained if we placed the sun at the center of the solar system. Okay, so that was the big, bold, new idea, and I won't go into all of the details. 1546, Tycho was born. He was a Danish nobleman, so he was wealthy. His family was friends with the king. The king at the time was Frederick II. And when Tycho was a young man, he became interested in astronomy. At the age of 26, in 1572, a new star appeared in this one northern constellation. Stars aren't supposed to appear. Aristotle and the ancient Greeks said the celestial realms are immutable, unchanging. And so the stars are supposed to keep the same brightness and the same positions forever. But clearly here was a new star, or it looked like a star. So Tycho and another astronomer made measurements of its position over the course of several months, and it didn't change its position at all. The ancient Greeks said, if some object is closer to us than the moon, then it can change. If it is beyond the moon, it should be immutable and unchanging. And so the measurements of the position of this new star prove that it was far beyond the moon. And so here was an example, one of many, where an ancient Greek truth needed revision. Now, Tycho had a very, very colorful life. He was a wealthy man. He could have just gone to banquets, hung out at court. Tycho's motto, which is the only surviving part of his astronomical castle built on the island of Ven near Copenhagen, is as follows. Anybody know Latin?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Neither wealth nor power, knowledge alone endures. So he could have spent his time just going to banquets and chasing women of the court. Oh, that aria that I sang was from Don Giovanni, okay? And I changed all the lyrics. It's the same melody from Don Giovanni, but I thought I'd make it about astronomy. Anyway, this is Tycho Brahe's life motto. He thought, how do you accomplish something that will last long beyond your life and that of your grandchildren? You need to create something new. And so he set out to be the best observational astronomer ever. And King Frederick II agreed to give him 1% of the Danish tax revenues, which he did every year, and that happened from 1576 until 1597. It was the equivalent of $5 billion in today's currency. And so he built this astronomical observatory, he hired engineers, they designed new equipment, and they measured the positions of about 800 bright stars more accurately than anybody had ever done this. And this data was used subsequently by a German astronomer named Kepler, who was able to devise 3 laws of planetary motion. And Kepler's model had the sun at the center. Now I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Tycho had a very unusual physical feature. He had a gold nose, because when he was 20 years old, he got in an argument with another Danish nobleman named Manderup Parsberg. One author says that they argued about who was the better mathematician. So they had an argument at a party, and about 2.5 weeks later, they decided to have a duel. And Tycho got a sword blow across the bridge of his nose. And so he always claimed that his prosthetic nosepiece was made of 100% gold. But 300 years after he died, they dug him up, in part to discover or investigate the chemical composition of his nose. At that time, he was just a skull, and there was this green stain on his skull, and so that meant that part of his prosthetic nose was copper. Okay, so he just was stretching the truth there. He built this astronomical, he and his many helpers built this astronomical castle on the island of Ven. And the peasants there didn't like it. They never had a lord live on the island. So they complained to the king of Denmark, and the king said basically, hey, this is feudalism, you are peasants. Tough. You have to work for the Lord for 5 days, and you can work for yourself for 1 day, and you can take Sunday off. So they built this castle, they built these instruments, they started observing the positions of the moon and the sun and the planets and the stars, and this operation went on for about 20 years. It was quite a place. Not only was Tycho interested in astronomy, but he was interested in alchemy, changing base metals into gold or something like that. So he had all these experiments simmering down in the basement. A friend of his gave him a pet moose. So this moose would wander around the castle, and the moose liked to drink beer. And the moose figured out how to turn the spigot on the big beer barrel, and one day the moose got really drunk and fell down a flight of stairs, broke its leg, and died. It was a court, okay? Hard to have a court without a court jester, and he had 2 court jesters. He had Per, who was regular size, and he had a dwarf, who was his other court jester. And his name was Jeppe, which I'm told is a reasonably common name there. But when I took the ferry to Tycho's island, last time I was in Denmark, surprisingly, the name of the ferry was Jeppe. It was like this inside joke for historians of astronomy. That's all I can think. So in 1597, 1588, King Frederick II died. His son, who would become King Christian IV, was only 11 years old, and so he didn't take the reins of control. It was done by a committee of older people. But in 1597, when Christian became the king, he told Tycho, that's it, the funds have dried up. And so Tycho moved to Prague, and he had a new patron who was Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor. And there he died in 1601. So I mentioned this fellow Kepler, and one of the things he was able to do with Tycho's data was that he had the most accurate measurements of the position of Mars ever made. And because of that, he was able to determine the exact shape of the orbit of Mars. The ancient Greeks insisted that all celestial motion had to be made up of perfectly circular parts. You could have a circle on a circle, you could have a combination of 2 circles. But Kepler determined that the true shape of the orbit of Mars was an ellipse, so it was squished in the sides. So that was very important. Many years later, when Isaac Newton came along, using calculus and the law of gravity, he was able to show why Kepler's 3 laws of planetary motion worked. The most important astronomer of the Renaissance was Galileo. He was born in 1564, and he died in 1642. Do any of you know the word metempsychosis? Ever heard of this? If you read James Joyce's Ulysses, it's in there somewhere. Metempsychosis is the transmigration of souls. So consider that Michelangelo died in 1564. Galileo was born in 1564. Galileo died in 1642. Isaac Newton was born in 1642. Were these people such geniuses because they didn't have to start from scratch? Hey, I already know math. I got it from the last guy that had this soul. I read a long scholarly article about this, and unfortunately, Galileo was born 3 days before Michelangelo died. So it's like, sorry, you can't have my soul, I'm still using it. Okay? Now, the important thing that Galileo did is that he heard of the invention of the telescope in Holland in 1608. He taught himself how to make lenses, and so he built some telescopes, and by the end of 1609, he started observing the sky. In January 1610, he discovered that there were these 4 star-like objects that go around the planet Jupiter. And so this was probably his most significant discovery. This proved that not all objects have to go around the Earth as the ancient Greeks insisted. It didn't prove that the Earth moved. But we're getting there. See, it's a common idea that Galileo proved that the sun is at the center of the solar system. He didn't. He just showed again and again that some truths held by the ancient Greeks needed serious revision. Galileo discovered the phases of Venus. Venus can show a crescent, a half-moon shape, a gibbous shape, or a full phase. That's only possible if Venus goes all the way around the sun. But back in ancient Greek times, a fellow named Ptolemy had a model for the motion of Venus, and it placed Venus always in between the sun and the earth. So Ptolemy's model needed revision. So that was another one of these things. Galileo didn't discover the rings of Saturn. His telescopes weren't quite good enough. One of the first things he found is that if he took his telescope and he looked at the band of the Milky Way, he could see more stars with his telescope than he could see with his unaided eyes. That's because the size of the lens was bigger than the pupils of your eye. And so he discovered many, many new stars that nobody had ever seen. Also, he discovered that the moon, which was, according to Aristotle, it should be perfectly spherical. He saw that it had mountains and valleys like mountains and valleys on the earth. And so this ancient Greek idea that three-dimensional bodies should be perfect spheres and motion should be along perfect circles, that wasn't working out very well. But the problem with Galileo was, and this happens in academia all the time, he garnered a lot of attention and he was a bit puffed up in his own importance, and so he made enemies. And any implication that the earth moved was counter to some verses in the Bible. And so he was advised in 1616 to just set aside astronomy for a while and work on something else. A friend of his, Cardinal Barberini, was elected Pope in 1624. And this fellow was a liberal intellectual. And so Galileo and many others thought, how great is this? We can get back to doing science. He went to Rome. He wished Pope Urban VIII, the new pope, he wished him well. And he asked permission to write a book that would, in a balanced way, discuss the pros and cons of the Earth-centered model of the solar system and the Sun-centered model. And so he went back to Florence and he worked on this book 8 years. He submitted the manuscript to the Inquisition. They asked for a few changes and the book came out. It was written in Italian, not in Latin, because he wanted more people to discuss it. And things were okay, except somebody dug up out of the Vatican archives this edict of 1616. And to everyone's surprise, it said a good Christian may not discuss the motion of the earth in any way whatsoever. Somebody went in there and added this extra phrase. And so the Pope was extremely angry. It's like Galileo had done an end around. Like you come home and you ask your mom, can I do this? And she says, no, you can't do that. Okay, and then your father comes home and says, Daddy, can I do this? Oh, okay. And then your mother sees you doing that. I told you not to do that. Well, Dad said I could, you know. So to the Pope, it looked like that was happening, that Galileo asked permission, full knowing that he couldn't discuss the motion of the earth in any way whatsoever. So that's why he was put on trial. He had to recant. But this is the legend well, 7 of the 10 Roman inquisitors signed the condemnation of Galileo, but 3 of them didn't. Okay? And after he recanted any heretical ideas and rose from his knees, the legend is that he muttered under his breath, "Eppur si muove." Nevertheless, it does move. Okay, so that's the main part of the legend of Galileo. Many of my students think, well, Galileo proved that the earth moves and Copernicus was right. But it's not true. The first physical evidence that the earth actually moved was obtained in 1725 by an Englishman named James Bradley. And about 100 years later, we finally were able to show the definitive proof. Consider a principle of survey that if you hold your finger out in front of your face and you blink your eyes back and forth, it looks like your finger is jumping back and forth because you're looking at the finger from 2 ends of a baseline. And so if you have the earth going around the sun and you have a nearby star, then you should see this nearby star shift back and forth every year. Well, it turns out that the biggest angular shift of any star is 1/5000th of a degree, which is about 1/10 of the angle that a hair plucked out of your head makes up at the length of your arm. It's too small an angle to see with your eye. Okay, so this is called parallax. So the definitive evidence for the motion of the earth that everybody could understand came along nearly 300 years after Copernicus published his revolutionary book. So that's the basic story of the major discoveries of Renaissance astronomy. I could sing you something else. The first half of a Neapolitan folk song, and then I'll sing you an English version of it, okay? Video mare quante bello, spira tanto sentimento, come tua chi tiene in mente, cacetato fai sunna. Guarda qua stu giardino, siente sesti sciure arance, nu profumo accusi fino, tinto core se ne va, e tu dice parto a Dio, t'allontane a stu core, da sta terra dell'amore, tiene core non torna, ma non me la sa, non darmestu tormento, torna sorriento, fammi campar. Here's an English version of this song. On my feet are 10 toes. They're not lady toes, they're men toes. And I keep them as mementos, for I love them tenderly. On my hands are many fingers, very good as doorbell ringers, and the thought knot of fingers lingers in my haunted memory. In the middle is my carcass, and I always dress my carcass in the best from Neiman Marcus. That's a big store in Big D. There are other things about me, things I'll show you if you doubt me, things that would not work without me, like my elbow or my knee. On my face, 2 eyebrows, they're not your brows, they're my brows. Behind those eyebrows, that's where you'll find me.
Woo!